Let me ask a question to begin with. If you had been present at the first Passover and days of unleavened bread, what would you have witnessed? Well, first, prior to leaving Egypt, you would have witnessed 10 incredible and miraculous plagues. You would have been witness to the destruction of the greatest empire of its day. You would have been delivered without fighting and war from generations of enslavement. Yet despite all that you would witness firsthand, that generation would not make it into the land of promise and rest. Their journey in the wilderness is a type of our journey in this life after baptism. Why did they fail to make it? And what can the church learn today from Israel's failures in the wilderness? There are a lot of lessons. The wilderness experience provides valuable lessons for Christians today. I want to begin not by going to Exodus, but I will get there, but to go to 1 Corinthians chapter 10. In 1 Corinthians chapter 10, Paul said in verse 1, "Moreover, brethren, I do not want you to be unaware that all our fathers were under the cloud, all passed through the sea. All were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea. All ate of that same spiritual food, and all drank the same spiritual drink, for they drank of that spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ." And then dropping down to verse 11 and 12, "Now all these things happened to them as examples, and they were written for our admonition," or our instruction, "upon whom the ends of the ages have come." Corinthians, I'm writing to you, he's saying, this was all for our instruction. And of course it applies to all of us today, in every generation it does. And verse 12, "Therefore let him who thinks that he stands take heed lest he fall." And that's a good point, because in essence what he is saying is, all right, Corinthians, you've heard this for many years over and over. But now don't think that you don't need to understand to hear these things, because if you think you stand, take heed lest you fall. It's a polite warning to all of us that we need to pay attention and look at these things in season when this comes around. So let's take some time to go back and look at this and see what are some of the New Testament lessons from the Old Testament experiences that they went through. Let's go back now to Exodus, and we'll begin in Exodus chapter 14. We're going to go forward here a little bit, but we'll start there. And there are important lessons right here in chapter 14. They have made it out of Egypt, and God has let them out. They came out with a high hand, and they're on the seventh day of the feast in Exodus chapter 14. So let's pick it up on the seventh day and take a look at this. They find themselves, of course, trapped down by the seaside, don't they? We call it the big Gulf of Suez, where that big ship has been there jamming everything up here for the last week or so before they finally got it loose. But I had it explained to me, and we had it in one of our maps years ago. In fact, I do have that map, but not with me, showing how that as they came down, they actually were guided to go into an area that would entrap them. That is, there were mountains down to the sea coming back around to the west of them, and here was an area that they could go into, and of course, guess who shows up? And Pharaoh and his army and everything. But there is a stretch of the northern Red Sea right there. It's about 8 miles across, where the waters overnight began to part. So God provided for them a way of escape. In Exodus 14, just a couple verses I want to refer you to. So they're trapped there. Verse 13, Moses said to the people, "Do not be afraid." Pharaoh's right over here, but God's keeping Pharaoh from being able to come in fire by night and so forth that stopped his army from being able to go any further toward the Israelites. Again, verse 13, so Moses said to the people, do not be afraid. Stand still, see the salvation of the Lord, which he will accomplish for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you shall see again no more forever. And they're probably looking around. Well, yeah, but they're right there and we're blocked. Well, verse 14, the Lord will fight for you and you shall hold your peace. Then the Lord said to Moses, and this I think is one of the most important things for us to learn from this, why do you cry to me? Tell the children of Israel to go forward, get up and move, is what he is saying. And they are down discouraged and thinking, why did you lead us out here, Moses, just to die in this desert? Well, what about us? Do we have moments in life when suddenly a trial, they weren't expecting Pharaoh to follow them and catch up to them and entrap them. And when they saw and realized chariots, everything else, well armed for that day and age, and they just were so discouraged. Here they had seen incredible miracles that God had done up to this point. Of course, Pharaoh is a type of Satan, and he pursues after them after the Passover, doesn't he? It's interesting about the Israelites. Jesus said, and we read it at the Passover last week, that is that in John 15, if you abide in me, you can do nothing of yourself, right? But you abide in me and you can produce much fruit. Much fruit can be gained. And you think about the Israelites. And I mentioned this to you once before. At the Passover, there wasn't anybody who did not do what Moses had instructed them, and through Aaron and others down through the line, to do. You get that lamb, set it aside on the 10th day, one without blemish, in your house, hut, whatever it was, and you sacrifice it at the beginning of the 14th. You don't leave any of it behind. Anything left over that you didn't consume, you burn it, and so on. Everybody was abiding in Christ, right? It wouldn't be long when you get to the 16th chapter and God introduces manna to them, except on the Sabbath, where they all, they're out there picking or looking for the manna to pick it. It wasn't there. It's always been kind of interesting to me how when it came to the Passover, and that nobody questioned Moses. At least we don't have any record of it. I'm not going to kill a lamb. What do you mean? Put that blood on the post and everything. Nobody questioned it. But instruction over the manna, we see right away, and even before then, right here, suddenly they're not abiding in the Lord anymore, are they? It's a good lesson there for us to think about it. The Passover's over. Are we still abiding in the Lord? We want to continue always to abide in Jesus Christ. We can do nothing apart from him. And we abide in him because we follow his instructions, his teachings. And we continue to examine and look at ourselves. Am I doing that? And not only before Passover, but even afterwards. We want to always continue to abide in the Lord. And they did not, and I understand in one sense they did not fully understand. God was merciful for a while here with them. But, when Jesus came, how did he teach people? They didn't have Bibles to look at and read. They had scrolls in the synagogues and so on. By miracles, didn't he? By healing. Mental illness, physical illness, many incredible things. God was doing the same thing back there at that time, 1400 BC, with Israel in bringing them out of Egypt. Well, as I mentioned here, continuing on, some comments here about Exodus 14. They accepted the blood of the lamb and thought everything would be easy after that. It's like people over the years, when I have baptize them, and other ministers the same thing. And we'll tell you the same thing. Sometimes you have people, they have some trial after baptism and real difficulty. Maybe it's an unconverted mate that is really putting the pressure on him. You joined that church. You're going to go to that service. And as a result, they get discouraged. Satan doesn't want to always let go once you've been baptized, right? He's following them down here to the Red Sea and the Gulf of Suez today. But they thought everything was going to be. How many times I've baptized over the years people, and sort of a naivety about it that, well, everything will be fine once I'm baptized. Once I have God's Spirit, it is going to be so easy. There won't ever be another trial. Well, there will be. And God allows it, and we're going to see why as we go along, for our good. For our good. Coming back here, now when they saw Pharaoh's army and everything, they were afraid, and suddenly they forgot about what God had already done for them. They started blaming God by blaming God's servant Moses for leading them into a trap. And they were trapped there around those mountains. We might call them hills today to us, and especially if you were familiar with the mountains in the western U.S., they're pretty high and tall. These mountains weren't quite like the Rockies, but enough so that they were entrapped. And by the way, it's interesting, we'll see this again too. They are blaming Moses, and the Lord said to Moses, "Why do you cry to me? Go forward." Where is it here? Verse 13, and Moses said to the people, "Do not be afraid, stand still. The Lord will take care of it, and he will help you. But no, it's your fault, Moses. You led us down here. And your word was not the truth." And really what they are doing, because they are afraid, they are blaming God. Another scripture we read at the Passover a week ago was John 13, verse 20. Let me just quickly read that. John 13 and at verse 20. Jesus said, "Most assuredly I say to you that he who receives whomever I send," he sent Moses to them, didn't he? "Receives me. And he who receives me receives him who sent me." So what is he saying? If you reject the one I send to you, Moses, then you're rejecting me, the Lord, and the one who is behind me, the Father. And yes, we don't want to let ourselves begin to start accusing God of this or that when things may not right away be going right. These people, you would have thought, well, why don't we turn to God? Why don't we ask God for help rather than blaming Moses? God is really not in their thinking, is he? They've just finished the Passover. It's been just, a week after the Passover, the seventh day of unleavened bread, and here they are stuck before the Red Sea there. Brethren, do we turn to God in prayer and in faith and trust him to open a door of deliverance? We have trials throughout the year, do we not? It's kind of like throughout the year, comparable to going out into the wilderness of this world, isn't it? And these things come upon us. And we do have to turn to God and learn from these mistakes that were being made. Granted, they were what you would call very new. They didn't have much understanding, certainly not the kind of understanding you and I had when we were baptized. It was much more, I believe, than what they had at that time. But God was merciful there, and he's with them for a while. We see that he's kind and he delivers them despite their accusatory attitude toward him through Moses. But again, verse 15 is the key verse for us today to take a look at and to act upon. When you have a trial or difficulty, we don't run away from it in fear. We attack it in faith. We go after it in faith. That's what they Get up and move. I will deliver you, is what he is saying. I'm not going to tell you how I'm going to deliver you, but get up and go. I will deliver you. And so always take a look at these little, maybe just be a short little verse, but it's telling us important lessons. And that is that we don't turn and run in fear, and we don't blame. But in all of our trials and difficulties in life, we do run. We don't run away. We run at it in faith, asking God to help us and walk us through it, help us that we're not going to back down spiritually from it. We're not going to physically be running away out of fear. Now let's go on here. Take a look at Exodus 15. A couple verses here. Verse 22. You see the Song of Moses takes up about 18 verses, but in verse 22, so Moses brought Israel from the Red Sea. Then they went out into the wilderness of Shur, and they went 3 days in the wilderness, and they found 3 days. The Red Sea, they have just passed through the Red Sea, and 3 days, just 3 days, forgot all about it. What God did for them. Verse 23, now when they came to Marah, they could not drink the waters of Marah, for they were bitter. Therefore, the name of it was called Marah. Verse 24, and the people complained. If you have King James version, it's murmured against Moses, saying, what shall we drink? So he cried out to the Lord. Moses cried out to the Lord in behalf and for the people. The Lord showed him a tree, and when he cast it into the waters were made sweet, and there he made a statute and an ordinance for them, and there he, God, the Lord, tested them, Israel. He tested them. You'll see this a few more times as we go along. That is in some of these verses. You can read over some of these verses and maybe miss that. He tested them. That's more than several times you'll see that. And why? Was he trying to say, well, let me see if I can get them, and then I can punish them? No, I want to help them. I want to build them up. And he always wanted to build his people up and strengthen, edify, help them in any way they can, or he can. And he does, and he does. Verse 26, and he said, if you diligently heed the voice of the Lord your God and do what is right in his sight, give ear to his commandments and keep his statutes, I will put none of the diseases on you which I have brought on the Egyptians, for I am the Lord who heals you. Now going back, a key thing in verse 26, and do what is right in his sight. Very important. Do what is right. I remember Mr. Armstrong used to make the comment that if we do what pleases God, he will bless us. And that is very true. That's really what's being said here. Just a few different words, but the same thing. And if we are doing what is right in God's sight, he will bless us. It may not be instantly or right away, but eventually, yes, he will. And he is working, and he has a plan, and he's carrying it out. And so, a very important verse here, the middle of verse 26. Do what is right in his sight. I should mention the word that in the King James is translated as murmuring or complaining in this New King James, which is what I'm reading. It varies in degrees from just muttering a complaint or mumbling a complaint to actually being very obstinate or stubborn in one's words and point of view or position in a matter and becoming even self-willed. So there's a lot of variance. Now the word in the New King James, complain here, well, maybe just a little simple complaint. Well, sometimes maybe it is, but in the cases here with Israel, it's been more than that and far greater than that. And so I'm not sure that the word complain or even the word murmur really does justice to the attitude that was being demonstrated here by these people. What we certainly can learn from this is that the way to our eternal rest is to heed the voice of God, which is his word, the Bible, isn't it? That we always heed and we follow it. That's why there in verse 26, you do all that is right in his sight. Well, how do we find out what is right in his sight? By the book that's in our lap. And that tells us and helps us to come to see. One interesting comment I wanted to make about this also, as they came to those waters. God will sweeten our waters in life if we will continually heed his word. He will sweeten our waters, just as he sweetened the waters for those Israelites. And how much more for those who have his Spirit? These people, they really, as you'll see as we go along, it seems like they looked at what what God did through Moses as magic tricks. Not realizing and understanding the reality of God. There's just a lot of things. Now, some did, but it appears like, which you'll see when we'll come to it, that some did not. All right, let's move along here, because Exodus, of course, covers the first year. Chapter 16. What can we see? Verse 1 through 4, and they journeyed from Elim, and all the congregation of the children of Israel came to the wilderness of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the second month. And so it's 30 days out, after they had departed from the land of Egypt. Then the whole congregation of the children of Israel complained against, and actually it says murmuring in the other translation of the Authorized King James, against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. And the children of Israel said to them, "Oh, that we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the pots of meat." And, let me just mention, they were not having filet mignon every night. You go to Numbers 11, verse 5, I think it is. Let me check on my notes here. I had it written in here. And the pots of meat was fish most of the time. Now, I like fish, by the way, but sometimes, it's Numbers chapter 11, verse 5. It tells you what the pots of meat were. It was fish. But coming back here, pots of meat, and when we ate bread to the full, for you have brought us out into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger. 30 days out, through the Red Sea, and you got us out here to kill us. And all of our little kids, we're going to just cry here. We're feeling so sorry for ourselves at this terrible situation we find ourselves in, and it's your fault. It is really, it's hard to believe, isn't it? Now, it was something there was missing with that generation. They never made it to the promised land. The next generation did, right? Those 20 and under. And, and I can't, I don't fully explain it. I mean, I can be critical of it in the sense that how in the world could you possibly want to go back to Egypt after 30 days and coming through the Red Sea? And you saw the whole Egyptian army was slaughtered and all of that. Verse 4, then the Lord said to Moses, behold, I will rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a certain quota every day that I may test them. Notice again, we see that? To test them whether they will walk in my law or not. And some would not. They went out there on the seventh day. Of course, it was not there. Also, we see this thing of verse 2, complained against Moses. If you drop down to verse 7, and in the morning you shall see the glory of the Lord. For the Lord hears your complaints against the Lord. Now here we see it differently. In verse 2, they were complaining against Moses, and Aaron too. But now we see what it really means. They are complaining or murmuring really against the Lord. That's who it's against. And, a lot of times, in the ministry, I know with Mr. Armstrong too, teaching God's truth, people resented it in some cases and spoke out against it. Well, if it is the truth of God's word, who, in cases like that, are they really speaking against? The one who gave it, right? All he was an instrument in teaching it. Well, that and more too. Now coming back here, again, verse 4, God tested them because he was not sure whether they would walk in his laws, his commandments. Verse 6 through 8, real quickly. Moses and Aaron said to all the children of Israel, at evening you shall know that the Lord has brought you out of the land of Egypt, and in the morning you shall see the glory of the Lord, for he hears your complaints against the Lord. But what are we that you complain against us? Moses is basically saying. You're complaining against the Lord. And then in verse 8, so Moses said, this shall be seen when the Lord gives you meat to eat in the evening, and in the morning bread to the full. For the Lord hears your complaints, your murmurings, which you make against him, not me, against him. And what are we? Your complaints are not against us, but against the Lord. And certainly he was taking note of all of that. And a lot of times, brethren, we have to be careful that we're not blaming God. What comes to my mind at times, I told you here a little while ago when I was up in North Carolina, an individual sends me a letter later. I at one time was his pastor, and just very bitter about tithing. Well, who's he bitter with? Me or any other minister who taught it, which I did in any church I've been to as a pastor. At some point in time, I'll go through the doctrine of tithing, as we all would do. So whose fault is it? Who are you angry with? Well, with God. And of course, eventually, it's something that took him away from the church. Now, the lesson here in Exodus 16 for us today is, no matter what the issue is about, stop murmuring, stop complaining, and ask God to help you and help us to see where we can change and where we can improve. What can we do? What can I do to change me? And ask God to guide us and help us to see that. And thinking that we need to give thanks because he is also, that this is happening. To teach us, to help us, that we may learn and be better. They never gave thanks for any. You read Exodus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. See how many times you find verses where the people got down and gave thanks to God. They don't even know what that was. I couldn't tell you one verse. I'd have to get a concordance to see if there is such if the word does exist in those books. No, we need to thank God for our trials and difficulties. He is in charge. He hasn't deserted us, and he will see us through if we look to him in faith, and rather than, as these people were doing, just blaming God and how could you do that to us and put us out here and leave us on our own and that type of thing. Chapter 17. Then all the congregation of the children of Israel set out on their journey from the wilderness of Sin, according to the commandment of the Lord, and camped in Rephidim, but there was no water for the people to drink. Therefore the people contended with Moses and said, give us water that we may drink. So Moses said to them, why do you contend with me? Why do you tempt the Lord? He will take care of it for you. Then in verse 7, So he called the name of the place Mazzah and Meribah because of the contention of the children of Israel and because they tempted the Lord, saying, "Is the Lord among us or not? Does God exist? Is there really a God? How could this be happening?" Basically is what it's coming down to. They certainly need to be able to, God proved himself to them. They had not learned how to prove God to themselves. And that's one of the first things that we do when we're coming into the truth of God and moving toward counseling for baptism, is we prove that God does exist, that the Bible is indeed the Word of God. But in all these things, they didn't have to do that. God was proving to them by miracles. And that Red Sea miracle, I don't know how you could become blind to that. Their attitude was that every creature comfort should just be there waiting for them. That they should never have any kind of hardship or suspected hardship to come on them at all. It should all just be a paved road through the Sinai. If it wasn't, then they doubted whether God was real or not. They never bothered to pray and look to God for the answer and for the help. Again, what does that tell us? We have trials. Sometimes we have trials that last longer maybe than they should have because we try to work it out ourselves apart from God. Big, big mistake. No, we have to look to God and realize there's only so much we can do, and we do have to do our part. And the rest, we look to him in faith and trust. He will not, Jesus said, "Look, I am with you to the end of the age." Matthew 28:20, is it? "I'm with you to the end of the age. I will not forsake you," he said. And we have to remind ourselves, that is true. He will not forsake us. We may have calamities. We may have illness that could be life-threatening. We may lose a member of the family. If we all live long enough, it's going to happen, right? But will he see us through it? He certainly will. Yes, it will be difficult. But yes, he does not forsake us. It's interesting when Paul said there in Romans 8, 37 through 39, is life, death, depth, height, whatever, anything separate us from the love of God and Jesus Christ? And the answer was no, nothing is going to separate us. We are different than this generation we're reading about. And we want to be sure that we stay always abiding in Christ. Very, very important too. Finishing there in chapter 17. Another lesson there is to not keep repeating the same old pattern of murmuring as the Israelites did. You go from one chapter in Exodus 1 to the next. Well, here we go again. Same thing. No, you would think that they would learn. And that's what we want to do, make sure that we are always learning. Now we want to go one last chapter in Exodus, and that's chapter 32. And you probably already know we're going to the golden calf, right? Not the golden corral, but the golden calf here. In Exodus 32:1, "Now when the people saw that Moses delayed coming down from the mountain, the people gathered together to Aaron and said to him, 'Come, make us gods that shall go before us. For as for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him.'" Now this is probably around Pentecost time, we'd call it today, Feast of Weeks then, in the time period here from leaving Egypt. And, well, why isn't Aaron supporting Moses? Well, look, folks, he's up there on the mount, and he's up there to be instructed by the Lord. What do you mean you don't know where he is? I don't see Moses standing up Aaron standing up for Moses here before the people. He had certain problems. A lot of it you could probably look at the family. That is, the birth order. You had the firstborn was Miriam, the sister, who was a very strong-willed lady, as we will see. Then Aaron, and then the baby of the family was Moses. And it's interesting about birth order. Here Aaron was very close in years to his sister. And now you don't read about her in this chapter and everything, but he seems to be much more the compliant type. I don't want, let's not rock the boat and all of that. Okay, you need some gods? Okay, we'll work something out here. More like that, rather than taking a stand for what he knows is right. By the way, that's a good lesson to us when we look here at Aaron. We want to take a stand for what we know and have proven is right. We don't compromise these things. Well, let's read on. You know the story here. Let's go down to verse 7. And the Lord said to Moses, "Go, get down, for your people whom you brought out of the land of Egypt have corrupted themselves. They have turned aside quickly out of the way which I commanded them. And they have made themselves a molded calf and worshipped it and sacrificed to it and said, 'This is your God, O Israel, that brought you out of the land of Egypt.' And the Lord said to Moses, 'I have seen this people, and indeed it is a stiff-necked, it is a self-willed, it is a stubborn people. Now therefore let me alone, that my wrath may burn hot against them, and I may consume them. And I will make of you a great nation,'" Moses. I will just start over with you, because this generation, to these people, we're not getting anywhere here with them at all. A couple other verses, and I'll make a comment or two here, verse 21 through 24 of this chapter. Verse 21, Moses said to Aaron, "What did this people do to you that you have brought so great a sin upon them?" So Aaron said, "Do not let the anger of my Lord become hot." Now, that was probably an understatement. I believe Moses was really hot when he saw this. You know the people, that they are set on evil. For they said to me, "Make us gods that shall go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him." And I said to them, "Well, whoever has any gold, let them break it off." So they gave it to me, and I cast it into the fire, and this calf came out. That's got to be one of the dumbest answers that anyone would want to give to try to justify themselves. And I'm sure he came to realize that. Moses, I'm sure pointed that out to him. He threw it in and just came out a calf. Again, where is your leadership for standing up for what you know? You were with me through all 10 plagues, talking to Pharaoh all the time, seeing what God did. You were in charge when I was up there on the mountain. Why aren't you taking care of business? And Aaron had some things to learn as well. And he had certain weaknesses. And we can learn from, we all have strengths and weaknesses, don't we? We can learn from his weakness here too. That we don't want to be like that. And hopefully he was overcoming much of that. This is only the first year. We got 40 years to go before he dies. And what can we learn from it as we look at an example like this? Well, the lesson here is that Christians must be leaders in their individual faith and collectively before brethren as well. what's it now, 25 years, 30 years, or whatever ago. And we had a lot, especially in the ministry. Leadership was not shown. You had a lot of errands, to put it plain, when it came to the doctrines of the church and what was being injected and being taught and being sent out to be preached in all the churches. No, we have to stand up, and we have to certainly show that leadership and faith to be strong. Notice what he kept saying 2 or 3 times, and he tested them. He tested them. What was he testing for? Under a little duress, under a little stress, will they cave or will they hold to it? Well, we all want to do everything we can, and certainly to turn to God. We can't just take credit for ourselves. That's another point I want to make. When I came out of Worldwide, and then I look back, I realize it'd be foolish to say I did it. I mean, God opened doors, helping me through it because of my own weaknesses at times there. But I'm very thankful. I'm very thankful that I am here, very thankful that, and I hope you are too, because it was more than just an academic situation back 35 or whatever years it was ago, back in the mid-90s. I believe there was a spiritual influence involved, and it wasn't from God's Spirit. And the church was truly being tried in a way that we in our time in the church and our generation have never experienced before, and I don't think anything like it since either. And but God saw us through and opened doors for us, but we have to step through those doors. We have to step out in faith and make those choices, but knowing we can't brag about it. It is God who helped us and saw us through. Coming back, well, we always have to take the lead in our personal life in serving God. And that's why it's important always to know why we believe what we believe, that we have a good understanding of that and a very thorough understanding as much as we can have. All right, that takes care of the first year of the Exodus. Now let's go to the second year, the book of Numbers. And we're here and we'll look at a few chapters and a few verses in Numbers. What can we learn? As Paul said, this was to teach us, to teach the church in the New Testament from the mistakes that they made. And I want to go to Numbers, the 12th chapter. Numbers begins with the second year of the Exodus. The time of mercy and patience has now really come to an end. God applies what we would call today tough love to their stubborn attitudes, which he didn't so much do in the book of Exodus, except at the golden calf incident. There was punishment there. But now as you get into Numbers, so in other words, in the first year, except for the golden calf, God was merciful in overlooking their stubbornness, their complaining, and all of that. But now it changes. As I said, he never inflicted punishment in the book of Exodus other than at the golden calf. Excuse me while I get a drink here. My throat's drying out. But now that's going to change. In Numbers, there is punishment and death every time they sin. Every time. Numbers 12. Here we have Miriam and Aaron disputing with Moses. And in verse 1, then Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses because of the Ethiopian woman whom he had married, for he had married an Ethiopian woman. Now, she was, according to Josephus, a prize from when Moses was a general in the Egyptian army before he fled into the wilderness after killing an Egyptian soldier. He had won a battle against the Ethiopians, and he had been presented a princess of the Ethiopians for his wife at that time. As, I don't know, was it for peace? Was it for bounty? I don't recall. But apparently she was there in Egypt and came out of Egypt with the Israelites. And and he's married to this a woman. She had been given to him by marriage. I kind of wonder, for 40 years he's in the wilderness, do you ever have any contact with her? But apparently she was there when God sent him back. And so anyhow, we see another point about this too, which I didn't turn to, but in Exodus, is it 18, his wife that he married in the wilderness, Jethro's daughter, what was it, Zipporah, was that her name? She was very angry over having to circumcise their two sons. And God was about, as you read the account there, to kill him if he refused to come under the covenant of the circumcision. Then you don't read anything about her the rest of the life of Moses. Now, Jethro was there at the time, apparently, because he came to meet them in the wilderness. Did Zipporah take the two sons and go back with Dad? You don't read anything about Moses' sons and after this. But he had two sons, and they are named early in the book of Exodus there, that he had by, I think her name was Zipporah, the daughter of Jethro. Now he has the Ethiopian wife, which had been given to him, according to Josephus, if that record is correct, over 40 years before. And she must have been living in Egypt while he was out in the wilderness. Some things are, questions come to mind, but you can't really answer them. We don't have enough information. Well, anyhow, verse 1, then Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses because of the Ethiopian woman. Verse 2, so they said, has the Lord indeed spoken only through Moses? Has he not spoken through us also? And the Lord heard it. Now, this is an interesting thing added, verse 3. Now, there are some things here that later writers inserted, and this would be one of them. Moses didn't write this about himself in this manner and way. Also, you'll find in Deuteronomy, is it 17, about the instruction to the kings? Well, maybe Samuel may have included that. It had to be somebody who had the authority to do it. In Genesis 36, you have the chieftains and dukes and so forth of the Edomites. Well, did Moses write that? Well, a lot of those were born after Moses was dead. And so somebody put that in there who had the authority before God to do that. And it's preserved. Now, this statement right here, now the man Moses was very humble more than all men who were on the face of the earth, there in parentheses. Somebody added that who had the authority to do it. And the Jews are very interesting in preserving the Old Testament. That's what Paul said there, is at Romans 3, that that was what they did. And they're very meticulous about that. And the Dead Sea Scrolls even show that before the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered, the oldest Jewish manuscript was 900 AD. Well, after the Dead Sea Scrolls, which went back about 125 years before Christ, I believe, they look, especially the book of Isaiah, was totally intact. It's in Jerusalem, in the Dome of the Book, I think it's called. And it is the Hebrew, classic Hebrew. It's exactly the same as the oldest manuscript that previously we had that was 1,025 years later. So they were very meticulous in how they preserved it. Let me just digress one other thing. one thing when in college, and I saw it later after college, I don't know how it got to Leningrad or St. Petersburg, but the scrolls of the Masoretic text, as it's called, were there. And there is a giant volume called Biblica Hebraica. And when I was in Portland many years ago, in this particular Christian bookstore was a copy of Biblica Hebraica, which was explained to us when we was in college at Big Sandy. And I didn't buy it, and of course I was surprised that it even existed. But it's a copy, and you could open it up, and it was incredible because we'd been explained to us in college all the detailed notes on the side, on the top, bottom, and in the center columns. And the scribes who would copy this, that is the scrolls, if it did not meet every one of these detailed explanations, jot and tittles, the copy was thrown away. They were absolutely very meticulous in how they copied it and preserved it. Really amazing. And I mention that here because when you look at verse 3, somebody, maybe it was Samuel, one of the prophets that would have done that and added that in. A very interesting statement about Moses Moses is not saying this about some. Now, I'm one of the most humble persons. No, that's somebody else is saying that. A couple other verses here, and we'll move on to the point. Now, so we see right now Moses is a very humble person. Verse 14 and 15, then the Lord said to Moses, if her father had put spit in her face, would she not be shamed for 7 days? By the way, that you'll find an example of that in Deuteronomy, where when a husband dies without having children by his wife, but has brothers, and the brothers refuse to have children by the widow, give the widow children to keep the family name and all of that, the widow, if he refuses, could spit in his face, and he would be shamed for that. And you'll find that in Deuteronomy where that would take place. Let her be shut out or exiled out of the camp 7 days, and afterwards she may be received again. Now she became leprous, of course, and one other verse, I'm sorry, I overlooked here, verse 7 I wanted to read. Not so with my servant Moses. He is faithful in all my house. He is faithful in all my house. Sometimes people have tried to use the example of the Ethiopian would say he was not to be interracially married. I don't see anything here where God said there is such a sin. What was God's answer to Miriam and Aaron? He is faithful in all my house. Yes, I see you got a point there, Miriam. I need to deal with this. You don't see that, do you? What was God's judgment? And, I don't know of any Ethiopian women that are not black. They are. That's the way God made them. And this was his wife. And he had won her, was presented, or whatever the right word is to use, in that battle. And he obviously brought her out of Egypt, and she was his wife. And Zipporah, I don't know what happened to her. So he had two wives, and this wife, there's nothing about her going into the promised land. She probably died as well. So what can we learn by looking at this? Miriam was contentious with her younger brother. Remember, my little baby brother, I followed that basket down through the river till it came to the princess of Egypt. Why, I'm so much older and more experienced than him. She was a leader, by the way. And there are roles of leadership for women, as there are roles of leadership for men. And there needs to be personal leadership when it comes to our faith and our beliefs, and to stand strong for those things that God has revealed and we have proven are true, and to live by them. She was a leader, and so was her husband. Her husband's name was Hur, H-U-R. He's mentioned in Exodus 17. He became a very good military leader under Joshua, who was the main commander. And Miriam seems to clearly wear the pants in the family. She became, she had many good leadership traits. She was a strong-minded woman, but you have to also have self-control about yourself, on your strengths as well as on working to overcome any of your weaknesses. She became self-important in her eyes. That was the problem. It appears that Aaron just went along with it, and Hur, that is her husband, Hur, H-U-R, simply stayed out of it to keep peace in the family. You don't see him getting involved too much here. He probably knew better than to try. Though both Miriam and Aaron sinned, Miriam became the leper, not Aaron. In verse 14 and 15, she was put out of the church. That must have been humiliating. Now it's interesting, somebody said and added there in verse 3 that Moses was very humble man, most humble man on the earth. What happened to Miriam was very humbling. Very humbling. And God knows how to humble us. And, you read the autobiography, Mr. Armstrong talked about, and he was a proud man at times. But God wiped out his business and brought him down to nothing, as he writes. And it took years, and really conversion, for things to turn around. And he was a strong man. Interesting last name. Very strong man. Verse 14, let her be shut or exiled out of the camp 7 days, and afterwards she may be received again, because she's also a leper. So Miriam was shut out of the camp 7 days, and the people did not journey till Miriam was brought in again. Now back in Exodus, what is it, chapter 15, you have the Song of Moses, and what else do you have? The Song of Miriam. She was quite an individual, but she began to want to assert herself above the one that God was using. And God did not use Miriam to bring Israel out of Egypt. He used Moses, that baby who's now 80 plus years old. Now let's go on to chapter 14, I'm sorry. Excuse me, chapter 14, a couple verses and things to look at here. Verse 1 through 4, so all the congregation lifted up their voices and cried, and the people wept that night. And all the children of Israel complained against Moses and Aaron, same old, and the whole congregation said to them, if only we had died in the land of Egypt, or if only we had died in this wilderness. Why has the Lord brought us to this land to fall by the sword, that our wives and children should become victims? Would it not be better for us to return to Egypt? So they said to one another, let us select a leader and return to Egypt. Now this follows the spies coming back from 40 days in the land that would become later the land of Israel. And of course, 10 out of 12 give a very negative report. Joshua and Caleb give a very positive report. Well, we don't want to hear that. But they should have. They were ready to go up. They had faith that God would see them through it, and we will move. This is only the second year, 2 years out, less than 2 full years out of Egypt, and they've gone up there for 40 days and come back. The people are bawling here and telling, verse 4. So said to one another, let us select a leader. Some leader. Anyhow, a leader, and let's go back to Egypt. Oh, they will be accepting us. We're glad to see you. We knew you would learn your lesson and come back to us. No, not at all. I can see where God got pretty angry. He's done so much for these people. And they are taking this approach. And, God has done an awful lot for all of us, every single one of us. We need to be thankful. And is there anything too hard for the Lord? Remember, that's what the one who came to Abraham and Sarah, Genesis 18. Is there anything too? You laughed. Oh, no, I did. Yes, you did. Is there anything too hard for the Lord? They didn't see it that way, I guess. The Israelites here did not. In verse 11, then the Lord said to Moses, how long will these people reject me? And how long will they not believe me with all the signs which I have performed among them? What else can I do? What else is there to be done to get them to believe me and believe in me? Verse 22 and 23. Because all these men who have seen my glory and the signs which I did in Egypt and in the wilderness, and have put me to the test, now these 10 times, and have not heeded my voice. That's interesting. Go back and count. 10 times we are at this point. So they certainly shall not see the land of which I swore to their fathers, nor shall any of those who rejected me see it. They missed the kingdom, right? The kingdom was the promised land for them. What about us? We don't want to be following in their footsteps in any way. That's why Paul wrote Hebrews chapter 3, in which he quoted the 95th Psalm. I'm not going to take the time to go read it, but you can in your own study. Who's he giving it to? He's writing it to the church in the first century, and of course to all of us down through the ages. What you see here in chapter 14 is really the crucial point of the journey. Within sight of the promised land, they turn back in fear. For that generation, the opportunity would never come again. Only get one chance. Verse 3 and 4, once again, we see how they reacted: self-pity, blame, fear. It ruled the day, did it not, in their lives. Verse 11, as well as 22, 23, I've read, their lack of faith was rejection of God. That's what it amounted to. It was a lack of faith which amounted to the rejection of God. Verses 39 through 45 I won't read, but they decide on their own, okay, well, we'll go up anyhow. All of a sudden they think they have a change of heart. And they're not going up with the Ark of the Covenant being held and leading the way like it did around Jericho. It was too little too late. The lesson here is that we must attack sin and attack it in faith. And as I said earlier, run and not run from it. Like that generation, this life is our only opportunity to enter God's eternal rest, and we will never be given another. That's really, when you go back to look at this and see the situation, theirs was physical. They'll come up on the great white throne judgment and have their opportunity then. But our inheritance that we have now is for eternal life at the second coming of Christ, and be far, far greater than the opportunity they will have 1,000 years later when they come up. Number 16, here we go to Korah's rebellion. And just to save a little time, one scripture I put with number 16, well, I can read all these. I only have 2 verses here. In chapter 16 and verse 15 and 16, then Moses was very angry, and he said to the Lord, do not respect their offering. I have not taken one donkey from them, nor have I hurt one of them. And of course, they're blaming Moses, and they want to replace him. Moses said to Korah, tomorrow you and all your company be present before the Lord, and they as well as Aaron. And they as well as Aaron. We're going to have a showdown, and we're going to see. And Moses, he may have made a mistake here when he got mad at the end of the 40 years, but he really was quite a leader, and in many ways. Well, what do we learn from that? Rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft, Samuel would say in 1 Samuel 15:23. And that's what you had there from Korah and those leaders who were with him. Also, look at verse 28. And Moses said, by this you shall know that the Lord has sent me to do all these works, for I have not done them of my own. And that's very important. We cannot take credit to ourselves. I did this. No. We had to come and make the right decision what to do, but it was God who helped us and walked us through it to give us victory. Let's go to Numbers 20 quickly. I've only got a couple here that I want to now finish up. Numbers 20, verse 1 through 4. Then the children of Israel, the whole congregation, came into the wilderness of Zin in the first month of what year? It's the 40th year. That's interesting here because 38 years are missing. We don't have any record. Numbers chapter 20 through 36 covers the 40th year. And before that, we only have the second year. All these things happening. Spies go north, Korah rebels, Miriam and Aaron try to equal themselves at least with Moses or whatever, and use the Ethiopian woman as their excuse, and all of that. But you can go to, and I won't do it here, but Numbers 33, and you will see, especially verses 18 through 36, gives you a walk of the stops in the wilderness, but nothing about what they did when they stopped or how long they stopped. Most of the time, they were in what is called Kadesh Barnea, and you have it in maps in the back of your Bible. You can see it. It's about 50 miles south of Beersheba in the Negev. There's not much there. They've looked to see if they could find signs of Israel being there during that time, but they never really built anything, so there wasn't anything for archaeologists to find. At least I haven't heard that they have at this time. Although there's one thing that just happened here, what was it, 2 weeks ago? There was a major archaeological find south in the Negev of scrolls. And they reported it. I saw it on Fox News in the evening news. They were reporting this major find of very well-preserved scrolls of the Bible, Old Testament. And so keep your eyes and ears open that you might hear something about that it'll take a while, I'm sure, for them to open them and to be able to go through them or before real information about them begins to come out. But it'll be interesting. I think it's exciting. I hope that more can come out and sooner rather than later. But I turn here to chapter 20, going on verse 2. Now there was no water for the congregation, so they gathered together against Moses and Aaron. And the people contended with Moses and spoke, saying, if only he had died, or we had died when our brethren died before the Lord. Verse 4, why have you brought up the assembly of the Lord into this wilderness that we and our animals should die? Now Moses is going to get angry here, and it's going to cost him the promised land. It does not cost him his eternal life, because clearly when Matthew chapter 17 is up on the Mount of Transfiguration, he along with Elijah is who they see in vision, that is Peter, James, and John there with Christ. But he's not allowed, as we already know, to go into the promised land here. But again, look at what you see. Here you're at the 40th year. This is when Moses, of course, committed this. He didn't give God the credit for what took place. So after almost 40 years, Moses lost his temper and his patience. We can learn from that, can't we? He failed to give God credit and glory for the miracle. As you read on there in verses 10 through 13, the water comes out of the rock. And so when you read verse 1, it says the first month. How do we know that it's the 40th year? Well, read verse 10 through 13. It wasn't the second year. It was the year before they were going to go across the Jordan River, the 40th year. He was so close. He lost a physical reward. He will have a great eternal reward, as we see. Many places, one that comes to mind is Matthew 17, that he'll be in the kingdom. They wanted to make, what was it, altars or whatever it was, I forgot now the exact word, when they saw Elijah and Moses on the Mount of Transfiguration in Matthew 17. So, yes, but God would not let him, but just took him up on, what was it, Mount Nebo, and you can see it. And you will die here, but you can't go in. The lesson should be that we don't want to think at the end of our days on this earth that we have made it, and so we can let our spiritual guard down. I'm old, I'm retired, and I fought a good fight, and now I'll just take it easy until the end comes. And guess what? We can really slip up. Now, I don't know that Moses, maybe I've over-described it in the case here of what Moses doing. He had a problem with his temper. And he, Aaron said, don't be hot with me. You can believe he was a pretty fiery man. And this was it could be a strength, but it could be a downfall and a weakness to him as well. We have to be in control of our spirit. And we need God's help for that. And it doesn't matter whether we're young, middle-aged, or in the final year of our life. And God is looking at us, and he, of course, considering us and judging us as well. Well, brethren, this concludes a survey of Israel's wilderness experiences. These experiences and failures were recorded for us today so that we can learn not to repeat them, that we can learn from them in our own personal lives. Brethren, let's learn the lessons from these experiences so that God can bring us into his eternal rest.